And with that, welcome in to the OBR Straight Talk. As you might see, we have rebranded from the OBR Straight Talk to the Mueller Sports Report, but we hope that doesn't move you away, and obviously it has nothing to do with anything related to the OBR, where I still am providing content. It has everything to do with Jared and his need to provide information and talk about things that are not solely Browns related. And so we will be rebranding, but we started with It's a Party because we hope all of you have enjoyed your New Year's Eve party and whatever that looks like. The Browns have obviously started the party on their behalf and are moving forward with something new once again. And so quickly, just to talk a little bit about the rebranding to the Mueller Sports Report, I will be focusing the podcast on things that are not just the Browns. So I will be talking about things related to the Cavaliers, the Indians, the Ohio State Buckeyes, wrestling, professional wrestling, not the cool stuff that people do in high school and college and in the Olympics, but the professional brand of wrestling. But to make things easier for you, when you look at the Mueller Sports Report on the iTunes or anywhere else that we are loaded, the first thing you're going to see is not going to be an episode number, because I think those might be pointless at this point in time, but it'll actually just be one word or two words about what the podcast is about. So this one is going to start with Browns, and it's going to have the words Kitchens, Dorsey, McDaniels, things of that nature after it. So the plan will be that whether it's me by myself or having guests, that each of the podcasts is really focused primarily on one thing. So you're not skipping through because you don't care about wrestling or Browns or Cavs or Indians or whatever. If you don't care about those things, you'll see that in the title and you will skip that, delete that off of your podcast app, however you are listening, or you'll just move on to one of the other great podcasts that we have covering sports in Cleveland. And so I'm going to list a couple of those, and I know I'm going to miss some, but there are some that I just off the top of my head know about that I just want to appreciate. That starts with the Locked On guys. There's the Locked On Browns with Jeff Lloyd. He brings on Pete Smith all of the time. There's the Locked On Cavs with Chris Manning, a great guy over at Fear the Sword. And then you have the 1085 podcast with Jack and Anthony. And you have That's What B Said with the ladies over there who do a great job. So just kind of push those real quick to all of you, because there are a lot of people doing a lot of great things. I hope to be a part of that in your life. Now here on the Mueller Sports Report. Again, I am Jared Mueller. I'm your host all day, every day. Whenever you hear this, you will hear my voice. This is my podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller, at JaredKMueller. Again, on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller. You can find my written work covering the Browns, which is today's podcast, at the OBR, which is at the OBR on Twitter. You can go to theobr.com for just to kind of get over to the site there on 24/7 Sports, a part of the CBS Sports family of networks. So now that we have moved past the rebranding of the OBR Straight Talk podcast into the Mueller Sports Report, it is time to talk about your Cleveland Browns. See, you thought I was going to get real excited there with that nah. Come on, y'all. We know what it is. We've seen it. We've been a part of it. We've experienced this season that has been so full of ups and downs that it causes us just to need to take a deep breath for a second on this New Year's Day. Okay, so we got that deep breath. Well, let's go backwards so we can go forward. So let's start with Freddie Kitchens, who was fired the day of the season ending. It is very clear, and it has been very clear for a long time, that Freddie Kitchens was in over his head We'll talk about John Dorsey here in a second, and the decision to hire someone who was clearly in over his head. The decision to not really get overly involved in the team when it was very obvious that Freddie Kitchens was in over his head. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it was very clear that Freddie Kitchens just wasn't ready. Everybody likes Freddie. Everybody thought Freddie showed some creativity last year with the offense. And one of the things that Freddie did last year that didn't kind of come into play this year is Freddie really focused on his players and what his players wanted. Not just wanted, but what was best for them, how to use them well. It was really all about the players. And unfortunately, what we have seen as Freddie Kitchens was in over his head, we saw some overcompensating. We saw Freddie Kitchens, and we've heard this from Jarvis Landry, and we can just see it from looking on the field, is that he tried to make it more about him. And what I mean by that is he tried to make that more about his system, his schemes, his plays, his creativity, instead of making it all about the players. We didn't see a ton of OBJ slants. We just didn't see Chubb or Hunt used in a way that we think would have been more beneficial to the team as a whole. We saw a lot of things that just didn't seem to make sense. And we didn't see him do the things that we saw last year. And so because of that, he is out. That overcompensation is something that we all recognize, right? Whether it's our workplace, our families, our dating lives, our friends, when someone isn't being true to themselves, when someone isn't comfortable in their own skin, when someone is trying too hard, that can cause problems. People realize it. People can see it, right? You can tell when someone is doing a bit or someone is trying to show you how awesome they are. I have a little rule when I play basketball. Again, still at my old age, I'm washed, whatever. Still play ball as often as I can. And that rule is pretty simple. I want to guard the guy who's talking the most. I want to guard the guy who has all of the gear on, has all of the, whatever, the shoulder pads, basically, the arm sleeves, the leg sleeves, the this, that, and the other. That's the guy I want to guard. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Don't tell me, show me. The people who are real, the people who understand, just show it. The people who don't have to tell it or have to try to prove it. And they try too hard and they're not comfortable in their own skin. And so in basketball, those people on the court tend to over dribble, try to do too much, try to overshow, whatever it is. And you can take advantage of that aggressiveness, of that stupidity, that noise, whatever, because in the end, the results are what matters, but the process tells you a ton. So with Freddie Kitchens, it was very clear that he was over his head. But what was really interesting is it seemed to be pretty obvious from the inside out that Kitchens was also disempowered. So you have a first-year head coach who has never done this, right? That is something he just hasn't done. And then you have a GM who everyone believed made a lot of decisions about who was getting playing time, who was getting on the final roster for game days, pushing certain things to happen, pushing other things not to happen, those kind of things. He explains Antonio Callaway getting a lot of reps, different times, all kinds of things. So you have a first-year head coach, and again, I don't really care about blame per se or excuses. All of those things are just words. But you have a first-year head coach who's in over his head, who is getting directives, and it seems clearly getting directives from the front office. All of a sudden, you have someone over his head with no power, trying to overcompensate, right? And so we saw a lot of doghouse bullcrap with Rashard Higgins, David Njoku, on and on and on, Demarius Randall, those kind of things. And so when you look at Freddie Kitchens, you look at a nice guy who was put in a difficult situation, who probably wasn't ready for that situation. Obviously, him turning it down would have been silly, right? Looking back, maybe that was the right move, but anybody who wants to be at the top of their field is going to say yes. They just are. I mean, there are very few people with so much self-awareness and so much self-confidence to say no. To say no to the job of their dreams. To say no to an opportunity that very few people get. It would have taken a lot of guts. It would have taken a lot of self-reflection and self-understanding for him to do that. If he would have done that, I guarantee you, people would have drug him over the coals. I don't really care what people would have done or do, but it's very true that if Freddie Kitchens, if we found out that he pulled himself from the running but was very interested in remaining the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, people would have had lots of questions. The other thing that probably would have been true is that it would have been very difficult for him to get another head coaching interview in the very near future. Even though it would have come off as self-reflective and aware and all of those kind of things, there would have been questions of his confidence in himself, his ability to lead, blah, 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 blah. In the end, as I compared on the OBR, Freddie Kitchens was David Blatt. Freddie Kitchens was, you have to remember, Freddie Kitchens was interviewed and hired before the OBJ trade, before the Olivier Vernon trade, which was combined, obviously, before Sheldon Richardson signed, right? He was the coach. He was hired as a coach of a very young team. He was hired where the main components of the team were Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward. Those were kind of the main core. And all of a sudden, OBJ, Olivier Vernon, Sheldon Richardson, Kareem Hunt. You add those players to the mix, and all of a sudden, things are different, right? Things are significantly different. No different than David Blatt, who was hired to coach Kyrie Irving, Deion Waiters, Tristan Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, so on and so on and so on. Tyler Zeller, I think, was still on the team when he was hired. I'm pretty confident in that. David Blatt was hired with all of these young guys, upside, potential. Andrew Wiggins was, when he was drafted, was seen as the guy, right? He was not the next Michael Jordan, but he was going to be the guy. He was going to be a great wing, great defender, able to score, great fit with Kyrie Irving, who was obviously Kyrie Irving and had just signed this new contract extension. And all of a sudden, LeBron James decides he wants to come home. And all of a sudden, Kevin Love is traded for. And all of a sudden, David Blatt is coaching Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Kevin Love, Mike Miller, James Jones, and a variety of other veterans. There's a similarity. There's a comparison there. The reality is I think Freddie Kitchens may have done well if he was coaching a team without OBJ, Olivier Vernon, maybe Sheldon Richardson. Who knows? I mean, again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. But I think he would have done fine with expectations of competing for a playoff spot. I think things would have been different. Again, this is not an excuse. I don't care. But trying to understand, again, for those of you first time listening, I am an independently licensed social worker, have been working in the mental health field for 18 years now. So thinking and how people think and process and interact with each other, all of that is really important and really ingrained in who I am. So I can't just put it aside. A young team, an up-and-coming team that maybe is expected to compete for the playoffs, that has Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins and Nick Chubb, maybe Kareem Hunt, who knows, whatever, and maybe Sheldon Richardson, but it really is still this young core. All of a sudden, they're growing together. All of a sudden, while Freddie might be over his head, the young players are still learning together with Freddie Kitchens and without these expectations hanging over their head and without pressure of getting OBJ the ball. Again, it's not an excuse, but that happens. And maybe John Dorsey doesn't disempower him as much because he's going to let him grow and give him opportunities to learn and all of that kind of stuff. And maybe Freddie doesn't feel the necessity to overcompensate because he's not being disempowered. He's not as over his head and the expectations aren't there and he's not trying to make a point. So maybe he works through things and maybe he has the respect of Rashard Higgins and David Njoku and whoever else. But the same thing may have been true for David Blatt. We don't know. We do know it was a mess in Berea. You're going to hear stories. They've started to come out. The Athletic has reported some. Lane Atkins, for our OBR subscribers, have reported some. We know it's a mess there. But again, why did it become a mess? It's not as simple as saying Freddie was terrible. He was. Why was Freddie terrible? What else was playing a role? It's not just one thing. And because of that, we got the news yesterday that John Dorsey was out. And now it's important to kind of look back and what we know and what we don't know and what we're hearing and all of that kind of stuff about John Dorsey. Because remember, the full Dorse, the fact that John Dorsey was looked at this as this conquering hero coming in, and all of a sudden, 2 years later, here we are. So we have to be honest about why are we here and how did we get here. And first, we'll start with the coaching search. It was very clear last year, and it's been reported since then by a number of people that John Dorsey wanted somewhat of a puppet. He wanted not a strong head coach. And what I mean by that is he wanted someone who would listen to Dorsey. He wanted someone who would just do what John thought was best. He wanted to be the lone voice, the most important voice. He wanted someone as a head coach who was echoing what John said. The problem with that is a ton. We've already talked about being disempowered and Freddie kind of already being over his head, but then Dorsey was using kind of his minion, his puppet, to enact his will. So Freddie couldn't be himself, but then John had this distance from the team, and I'm told that distance continued to grow to the point over the last few weeks of the season. He was rarely saw on the practice field, rarely interacted with players, coaches, anything like that. Rarely was he involved in any of the things that he had been involved with the first year and a half. So last year's coaching search was really about finding someone who would do what John wanted him to do. We know that wasn't going to be Greg Williams, and I want to make sure I make this really clear. Greg Williams wasn't the answer, folks. I know a lot of people like him, especially maybe old school people, older people, people who like bravado. Greg Williams was full of sound and fury, and in that locker room, it signified nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, the results on the field look good, but the reality was his defense never changed. It never looked at what were the players' talents, what was the other team going to do. He just did what he wanted to do, and he said a lot of things loudly, and he said a lot of curse words and all of those kind of things. But in the end, as a leader of men and as a coach, those two things are the most important thing as a head coach, or really as some of the coordinators. He really wasn't someone who did both of those things. Now, I get it. He helped lead them to these wins. They were more disciplined, blah, 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 blah. That's a substitute teacher that players are a little bit afraid of, right? Now, you may say, well, good, they're afraid of their coach. Yeah, that's great, but that's a substitute. OBJ and Greg Williams would have been a funny interaction. And over time, that would have worn them down. Because again, that is all noise. It's not substance. It's noise for noise purposes. There are times where you need to be loud and you need to have bravado, and hey, you even maybe need to cuss. But here's the thing. On my podcast, you have, that I know of, never heard me say a significant curse word. I don't think so. It's possible I may have, but you've probably never heard that. And if you've been listening to me for a long time or reading my writing for a long time, if all of a sudden I came on here and said 2 cuss words, they would have some value. You'd be worried about me, or you would think something's going on, or holy crap, Jared's really passionate about that. Because if you're cussing all of the time, if you're loud all of the time, it comes down and it just becomes volume that he's loud, but he's always loud, so nothing is important, right? And there's obviously a balancing act to all of that, but Greg Williams was not the answer. So in the coaching search, Greg Williams would not have worked with Dorsey because he wouldn't have just bowed down to what Dorsey wanted. There was a number of other coaches that, look, Mike McCarthy wasn't in Cleveland when everybody expected it, didn't even interview. And it was said to be a mutual agreement, whatever, when they delayed it, everything else. But what really came down to is Dorsey knew McCarthy was strong-willed, and McCarthy knew Dorsey was strong-willed, and they kind of figured out, this ain't going to work. So you have a coaching search where the focus wasn't finding the best coach. The focus was finding someone who would do what Dorsey wants. And that's different than being in alignment, right? Being in alignment, we're going to talk about that for future-oriented stuff. Being in alignment is all about, are we thinking the same way? Are we going in the same direction? Are we together? that wasn't what John Dorsey was looking for. He was looking for someone to do his bidding, to do his will. That's not alignment. That's a puppet. And so the Browns, coming off what seemed like a rejuvenation last year with Baker Mayfield and Jarvis Landry and all kinds of stuff, all of a sudden have short-circuited their future with the fact that John Dorsey did not want a strong head coach. What did we see in the locker room? What did we see in discipline? We didn't see a strong head coach. Now, you can be a player's coach and still be a strong head coach. You can be a disciplinarian and be a weak head coach, which Freddie tried to do kind of both. But in the end, you've already short-circuited everything. Every single thing by the coaching search. John Dorsey's desire for him to be the voice, to have a puppet, to have someone who will only do it his way, well, that sets you up for failure, folks. And given everything we already know, just remember John Dorsey and the Browns know more, right? They know everything the players have told them. They've seen so many things. Remember that John Dorsey wanted Freddie Kitchens to return. He wanted what was best for John Dorsey, not what was best for the Cleveland Browns. And that really goes to kind of the personality stuff, right? The whole, you're going to call me Mr. Dorsey, right? There's just a lot of things where John was a lot about John. The whole wake a sleeping giant, he wanted to have his own kind of catchphrase, right? Now, if it works, great, right? All of this stuff is all about, if it works, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And in this case, it was likely that it wasn't going to work because John wanted everything to be about John, right? And John but always looked to short circuit things. He always looked for discounts. He always looked for ways to kind of take advantage of things. Antonio Callaway, Tyreek Hill are just two of the strong examples. Kareem Hunt. There are things that John Dorsey is so willing to do that, to be honest, as I started doing draft prep, I started looking at character players as likely Browns. Because for John Dorsey, that was a positive because it gave him a second round value in the fourth, or it gave him Kareem Hunt on a $1 million contract, or whatever it is. John Dorsey was a lot about John Dorsey. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, inside the office, outside of the office, how he presented himself, how he handled himself. And it's the same kind of thing that caused problems in Kansas City. It's not surprising that Freddie Kitchens was John Dorsey's first and only coaching hire ever. Because what John Dorsey can be very good at is being a talent evaluator, but being the decision maker about that talent evaluation wasn't his strength. Being a communicator wasn't his strength. It didn't happen. And so the coaching search short-circuited everything. And it was because of John Dorsey's desire to have everything John Dorsey. If John Dorsey would have hired Mike McCarthy, they may have clashed, but that might have been okay. Because they may have clashed in personality and some of the decision-making, but could they have been aligned in vision? Could they have been aligned in how they wanted to do things? What was important? Even if that meant Rashard Higgins, not Antonio Callaway, were getting some of those earlier snaps. Even though John Dorsey may have wanted Antonio Callaway to thrive and survive and be good and be an important piece, maybe Mike McCarthy would have put Rashard Higgins in there knowing he was better and more reliable and all those kind of things. Because alignment is different. So the coaching search short-circuited the Browns' future. But looking at their future, we have to give some credit to Dorsey. And this is why people like Darryl Reuter and others are really upset that Dorsey is gone, because it can be very easy to look at the fact that John Dorsey brought in some talent. He did. And so I want to give him credit, but I also want to be real about this credit. And I'm going to really focus on the top end stuff, because here's the reality. Top end is really where Dorsey did well. Everything else has kind of been a crapshoot. So let's look at it. Baker Mayfield. At some level was a surprising number one overall pick. On the other hand, the New England Patriots were interested in trading up to try to get him in the top 3. there were other teams that would have taken him in the top 3, top 4, top 5, whatever it is. I can say with much certainty that if John Dorsey hadn't come in, and again, this isn't reigniting any Sashi and Dorsey wars, none of that kind of stuff, but I can say this. If John Dorsey didn't come in, and Paul DePodesta and Sashi Brown and Andrew Berry were still in charge of the Browns in the draft for Baker Mayfield would have been the number 1 overall pick. I was actually very surprised that John Dorsey picked Baker Mayfield. I thought Sam Darnold would be the pick for a variety of reasons, but he did pick Baker Mayfield. So we give him credit for that. I don't care what anybody says. Baker Mayfield is the future of the Cleveland Browns. Right now, I'd put some money on him being the MVP next year without even knowing who the head coach will be. We'll get to that in a second. So, going from there, we have Denzel Ward. Now, the Browns were in a great position to make a decision between Denzel Ward and Bradley Chubb. Bradley Chubb, the edge rusher, NC State, who ended up going to the Denver Broncos, would have been a very good pick as well. I think Bradley Chubb probably would have been the pick of other people. John Dorsey really valued what he brought. So he picked Denzel Ward, who has been a very good player. We like what he's done. So great. So we got Baker Mayfield and Denzel Ward with the 1st and 4th pick. And remember, when John Dorsey took over, Sashi Brown had left him with probably the greatest accumulation of draft assets and cap space that we've ever seen. So it's not just that he made these picks, but he's making these picks with so many assets, right? So without the extra assets, he would have had Baker, but not Denzel Ward. But he did. He got Baker, he got Denzel Ward, he could have had Bradley Chubb. Either of those would have been very, very good picks. Then the next talent that he acquired is Nick Chubb, and we obviously know how great Nick Chubb has been. Probably should have led the league in rushing, didn't, whatever. But we do know, and again, I can say this with a lot of certainty, that if he had the opportunity, he would have drafted the running back that Seattle drafted, Penny. So Seattle drafted Penny at the end of the 1st round. If he had fallen either to 33 or to 35, I believe, where Chubb was picked, Rashard Penny, not Nick Chubb, would have been the Cleveland Browns running back. Now, who knows how Rashard Penny would have done in Cleveland versus Seattle? We don't know, but we do know that Nick Chubb is a great pick. He just wasn't his first pick. He wasn't the guy he wanted early in that 2nd round. That was Rashard Penny. I can also throw a little piece of information I may have thrown out in a previous podcast, but it would have been really interesting if Lamar Jackson had fallen to that 2nd round, because I do believe the Browns would have looked at or thought about drafting Lamar Jackson early in the 2nd round, and I can say that they were at least interested in that. And again, I can say that with some pretty good certainty from conversations at the Combine with someone that has GM type words in their title, but would not be saying their name right now. So we're giving credit for Baker Mayfield, Denzel Ward, and Nick Chubb. Great. I think we can also give credit for the OBJ trade. The reality is that OBJ probably would not have been a trade the Browns could have pulled off hadn't John Dorsey not been here, because Dave Gettleman likes to deal with his people. He didn't even really give the San Francisco 49ers an opportunity to change things, to give another offer, a better offer, those kind of things, primarily because Gettleman and Dorsey were close. So I don't think, without Dorsey, I don't think it's possible that OBJ would be a Cleveland Brown. So we have to give him credit for that. The other reality is I don't know if a more analytical approach would have wanted to put so much money towards the wide receiver position. Again, these things are not binary. They're not ones and zeros. They're not black and white. But a lot of money to Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. is a lot of money off of cap space for wide receivers. You want talented players, period, across the board. But at this point, you have two very highly paid wide receivers. Both may be underpaid at some level. But the OBJ trade and having Odell Beckham Jr. on the roster is credit to John Dorsey. And then we have Sheldon Richardson. Again, that was a good decision to bring him in. I would say at some point I think Greedy Williams is going to be seen as an asset that John Dorsey brought in. He had an up and down season this year as a rookie, which he should, adapting to a new scheme, NFL level, blah, blah, blah. So that's fine. And he was picked on a lot because they didn't want to really go after Denzel Ward after he kind of came back and was himself. And then Kareem Hunt, whatever you think about him, there's the off-the-field stuff, obviously, but he has been a great locker room guy. He has done what he's expected to do, and he is talented, as well as, honestly, he is someone who's decoy-oriented in that you have to pay attention to him and Chubb in the backfield at the same time, and allowed Nick Chubb not to get as many rushes. That's really not true. Freddie Kitchens made sure Nick Chubb didn't get a lot of too many touches, but Hunt was a talent. Now, he brought in other players, but if we're just being really honest about talent that could impact the team in 2020 and beyond, that's the list. Baker, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, OBJ, Sheldon Richardson, Greedy Williams, and Kareem Hunt. 3, 4, 7. I list 7 quality players that John Dorsey brought in with the most draft asset and cap assets probably known to man ever. When you combine the two, John Dorsey had the greatest draft and cap assets possible. And I list 7 players. We have no idea about players like Sione Takitaki and Mac Wilson. I don't think they look good in their first year, but we have no idea about them. Austin Seibert is a kicker. Jamie Gillian is a punter. Fine. But we're talking about people who are going to make an impact in 2020 and beyond. Then we're talking about 7 players with all of those assets. 7 players that can make an impact and should be starting 2020 and beyond. That's not a good batting average. Even though those 7 players are good to great, whatever terms you want to use, those 7 players are why people didn't want John Dorsey gone. The problem is those 7 players came again with the greatest draft and cap assets available. 7. We can look at some really quick swings and misses. Antonio Callaway, Jannard Avery being traded away. Austin Corbett is the big one. He really set the team back with Austin Corbett. Could have been a number of other offensive linemen that would have done a very good job at their position. Instead, it was Austin Corbett, or he could have had someone like Cortland Sutton, the big wide receiver that's in Denver, Harold Landry, the edge rusher. There's a lot of players that could have been in that position. Chad Thomas is at some level just another guy, a jag. Tyrod Taylor for a 3rd-round pick. Definitely understand, and I was a proponent for that. In the end, that's a waste of an asset. Chris Hubbard was signed to make Todd Haley happy. He has been bad to terrible at his position. Greg Robinson was better than he was and still isn't good. Also was not going to have an impact on 2020 or beyond, most likely, so we're not adding him to the list. So when we look at this, he did a really good job with Baker, Ward, Chubb, and OBJ and Hunt. Those are some weapons. And Sheldon Richardson's the offensive or the defensive line guy. Greedy Williams is an outside guy. Where he really struggled when we look at Avery, Corbett, Chad Thomas, Chris Hubbard, Greg Robinson is your meat and potatoes. The core of who you are as a team is on your defensive and offensive line. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to get those done. He wasn't able to focus his energy there. He wasn't able to be successful there. Whatever terms you want to use, he failed at those, right? And so we have 7 players that we can credit to John Dorsey. That's it from everything he had to work with. We have some simple players on the other side where we can go, that did not work out, right? That list could go a little bit deeper. You know, they're hoping Ratley can be something. They're hoping for a lot of different things. But in the end, when we look at John Dorsey, there are holes that remain. Big holes. For next year, and next year alone, given every asset that John Dorsey had to work with, and a bunch of young players, right? Myles Garrett was already there. Larry Ogunjobi was already there. Joe Schobert, Joel Bitonio, J.C. Treader, at the time Kevin Zeiler, who was traded off for Olivier Vernon, who we'll either call a miss or somewhere in the middle, because we know health has always been an issue, or been an issue for him for a long time, and that doesn't get better as you get older. With all of those assets and with those young players already around. And I apologize, I need to add Jarvis Landry to the list. So 8, we're at 8 players. I don't know why I forgot him. That's my fault. See, I take responsibility for my mistakes. Jarvis Landry gets added to that list. That's the 8th player on that list. Again, my fault. He traded for a franchise, Jarvis Landry, and then signed him to a really large contract. So add Jarvis Landry, 8 players that are important and valuable for the future of the Browns, acquired by John Dorsey. Again, my apologies, but holes remain. So looking into 2020, and just into 2020, not considering all the contract extensions that will be coming up soon, the Browns have holes at left tackle. We're talking starters. Left tackle and right tackle and wide receiver 3. Rashard Higgins is most likely not to be back. Could Damian Ratley be that? Maybe. We don't know at this point in time. But we know that at a minimum, they do not have solid starters at left tackle, right tackle, kind of important, and wide receiver 3. I believe they have a quality right guard in Wyatt Teller. Drew Forbes could fight for that. It's also true Drew Forbes could be in line as their right tackle position. There's nothing that tells us that's certain. So on the offense, there are 3 positions that are considered starters that are holes. It could be 4 if David Njoku is moved on, is whatever. It could be 4 starting positions out of the starting 11 offensive players that are key starters that are missing. Already, we're talking about 4 starters on offense. Then we go to the defense. Who knows about Olivier Vernon, his health? He's not someone you can rely on. The Browns have very little depth at edge, and if they decide to move on from Vernon because of his contract, they can need an edge starter. At minimum, they need someone who's close to an edge starter because of Vernon's injury history. We still don't know if Myles Garrett's, when he's going to get reinstated. That's a joke, to be very honest with you, but it is what it is. So we need an edge rusher. The Browns need at least 1, maybe 2 starting linebackers. Listen, Mack Wilson in pass coverage has been very good. His ability in run fits has been terrible. His ability to rush the passer and complete that has been terrible. He gets good pressures, can't break down, can't make that tackle, has been fine. He's almost a extra safety. He would be a good third safety kind of thing. Again, he's not really. He's a linebacker. If Joe Schobert is not re-signed, something John Dorsey didn't want to do, the Browns need 1 to 2 starting linebackers. Can Sonny Takitaki or Mack Wilson take the next steps? Hopefully. But again, we don't know that. They didn't show anything that told us that. So right now we can say 1 to 2 starting linebackers. If Joe Schobert's gone, I think that's 2. And both safeties. Demarius Randall, had a really good first year, and he was kind of on that list of Dorsey's finds. You know, he traded Deshaun Kaiser and moved around in a couple of rounds to get Demarius Randall, and he had a very good first year, really struggled, and some of the attitude and culture issues started to kind of pop up with Randall. Unlikely he'll be back. And then Morgan Burnett went out with the Achilles injury. Jabril Peppers was traded as a part of the OBJ Olivier Vernon trade. So there's nobody there. So on defense, we're talking at least 3 starters. Most likely we're talking about 5 starters to very important players. So the Browns have 9 of their starting 22 positions that we can right now identify as having holes. While John Dorsey's legacy are those 8 players, are Jarvis Landry, Baker Mayfield, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, OBJ, Sheldon Richardson, Greedy Williams, Kareem Hunt. While those 8 players can be his legacy, his other legacy is after 2 seasons where he spent a ton of draft and cap asset and spent a ton of that, the Browns look like they have 9 of their 22 starters that are lacking for the 2020 season. Again, some of those could be filled. Drew Forbes might be an okay right tackle. Damian Ratley might be an okay third wide receiver who generally starts. David Njoku could stick around with everything turning out the way it is, but he showed a ton of immaturity. No matter what else was going on, he showed a ton of immaturity this year. And then on the defense, at least a quality starting level edge player because of Vernon's injuries issues, 1 to 2 linebackers and both safeties. All of that is left. About 9 of the 22 starters the Browns need going into this next season. So that's the past. Freddie Kitchens was over his head. He was not empowered. He overcompensated. He really was David Blatt. Dorsey's coaching search process, looking for his puppet, someone who would do what he said, short-circuited everything. He brought in talent. Again, I would say 8 players that are foundational players, which is great, but almost nothing else. At least that we can say right now. Again, if any of those young players, Forbes and Taki and Mac Wilson, if any of them, Sheldrick, Redwine, if any of them are able to step up, great. But at this point in time, there was nothing we've seen in the first year or second year of some of these players to say that they are able to step into the approximately 9 starting roles that are holes for the Cleveland Browns. All of that combined with Dorsey's personality, gruffness, ego, arrogance, whatever term you want to use, all of that combined, John Dorsey wanted Freddie Kitchens to return. Neither are back. I'm going to take a quick break to talk a little bit about food because I love food. And then we're going to talk about the future real quick. And then we're going to finish up this first episode of the rebranded, the Mueller Sports Report. Again, I am your host, Jared Mueller. You can get a hold of me on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller. That's JaredKMueller. Time to talk a little bit about food. And since it is New Year's and it is officially the first Mueller Sports podcast, we're going with queso. So the real quick, and mostly for my buddy John Cahill over in Ireland, who runs the Two Green Browns podcast. That's what I'm looking at right here. It's at Two Green Browns podcast over in Ireland. I'm going to share real quick my queso recipe because I think it's the best queso I've ever eaten. And it took me a while to figure out all of it, but it's really, really simple. So first, get yourself a big old block of American cheese, American white cheese. So there's American yellow and American white, and I have no idea what it is in Ireland. Sorry, John. But I will tell you this, with cooking, for me, cooking is experimental. It's try a little of this, little of that, all that kind of stuff. It's unlike baking. My wife's the baker. She runs the bakery. Everything has to be kind of scientific. So cooking in this, I want you to know, I'm not going to tell you the exact amounts, because you got to kind of work with how you like it, your consistency, those kind of things. But I will honestly at times grab a 5-pound block of white American cheese, chop that up into just cubes, whatever, just makes it melt quicker. And then I get a thing of heavy cream. And again, this isn't going to be a ton, but you're going to do it based on how you like your thickness. So that is kind of the one part of it. The other part of it is the peppers or the chilies. And so you're going to want to get a can of green chilies chopped up. You can get that mild, whatever type of flavoring you want, however many you want, all of that. But those are generally coming in cans because you like that liquid. The liquid is good. So if you're doing it by chopping up chilies yourself, you want to figure out how to make a little bit of a liquid to go with that, because that kind of going through the cheese and cutting through some of the cream can be really, really helpful into flavoring your queso. And then, so really those are your 3 components of a standard queso. Okay, so you're talking white American cheese, heavy cream, green chilies. That's going to get you a queso that is very similar to whatever you would get at some kind of Mexican restaurant here in America. What I would do is I would put some heavy cream in the green chilies, again with the liquid, and let that kind of flavor up the heavy cream. Let the heavy cream get warm. You don't want to get that too boiling or anything like that. And then you put in your white American cheese, cut up in whatever way. You can shred it, whatever makes it easier for it to melt, doesn't matter. Put it on low, let it simmer, let it all melt together, keep stirring it. You don't want to burn the bottom. The thing that I do that I think kind of takes it up a notch is I add sweet peppers. And so what I actually do is I take the sweet peppers, cut them up, get the seeds out, all that kind of stuff. And then I put that in with the heavy cream before I put any of the chilies in. And then I will use an immersion blender if I don't have time. If I have time, I just want to let that sit. I want to let the sweet peppers and the cream just kind of get together. I want the warmth to kind of bring out some more of the sweet pepper flavoring, all of that kind of stuff. I can let that sit for 6 hours. I don't care. Obviously, I want to stir it. I don't want to let the cream curdle, any of those kind of things. But that's going to get this nice, sweet kind of thing. If I don't have time, I'm just doing heavy cream, cutting up the sweet peppers, and I'm using an immersion blender to kind of put all of that together. If I don't have time to kind of let it all steep, I will add just a little bit, kind of a sprinkle of sugar into that, maybe a little salt, pepper, whatever, just to add that little bit of sweetness that doesn't get in there when you don't take your time. But so you have the heavy cream, the sweet peppers, let it steep for as long as you can. Then you add your green chilies, let that go for just a little bit, and then add all of your cheese. I tell you, this is great queso. The other thing you can do is, again, if you use the big blocks, you can freeze that. So we just put it into little circular Tupperware containers, screw on the lid, throw it in the freezer, and then as we go through it, we can just pull them out, let them, we get done with one night, we just put the next one in. So again, that is your food queso recipe. Hopefully you enjoy it. I know John has drooled as I've talked through it, but again, it makes this nice sweet with this nice kind of the sour from the green chilies. And then the creamy, nice deliciousness of the white American cheese and the heavy cream put together. Again, 4 ingredients makes an amazing queso. We put it on eggs. We obviously use it for dipping chips, all kinds of stuff. Put it on burgers. Who cares? It's amazing. You will love it. Make sure you make that. So, John, hope you enjoy. I hope you wrote it down this time if you hadn't in the past. So, we talked about the past. We've talked about a little bit about food. Now let's talk about the future. So, we're going to start off with reports that have just come out, that basically Paul DePodesta is going to be running the coaching search. It is something we at the OBRs basically have known throughout this process. It was not going to be Jimmy Haslam. We didn't want that. No one wanted that. Paul DePodesta is going to be running the coaching search. That doesn't mean Paul DePodesta is going to have a bigger role outside of that. We still think Paul DePodesta, the chief strategy officer, is going to remain living over in San Diego someplace, coming back and forth to Cleveland during the important times, but he is going to help set the direction for the franchise. So that's what we know now. That's been reported, so that we can all kind of work together. From Paul DePodesta to the head coach to whoever the general manager is going to be, there is going to be some synergy. And to be honest, given that he wanted to hire Sean McDermott, given that he wanted to hire Stefanski last year, so far it seems like he may have a good grasp. And again, Paul DePodesta, if you guys don't, you think analytics is the devil because Tony Grossi has said it or other people have said it, you may not understand analytics. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'm the right guy to explain it, but here it is. Analytics isn't a spreadsheet. It's using information to help you move forward. Right? It's using information to help you make better decisions. So, for example, when I look at my miles per gallon little thing on my car, if that is low, so I drive a Prius because I like to just save money, to be honest with you, and I got 0% financing. Yeah. I normally get 45 to 50 miles per gallon. If I'm driving my car and it says I'm at 30, that piece of information tells me something is wrong. Either I'm driving poorly, I'm letting my car, because it's cold, I'm letting my car sit too long to warm up, whatever. Maybe something's wrong, maybe I need an oil change, whatever it is, that piece of information helps me make a decision or make decisions and how to change things. That's analytics. It's just looking at information and using more information to make decisions. Paul DePodesta is going to use more information to make decisions. He's not going to be alone in this process. It's not just going to be Paul DePodesta looking for some Sashi Brown coach to follow some spreadsheet. They do that in baseball now more and more, because baseball has less personality, other things. Baseball can be very ones and zeros. Football isn't, and Paul DePodesta knows that, but he's going to be running things. So here's what I'll say. There are 3 real options that we know of and we think are going to be true. Josh McDaniels, paired with Cesario or Ziegler coming out of New England. And then it could be Stefanski coming out of Minnesota, paired with Andrew Berry, the former Browns assistant general manager under Sashi Brown, and John Dorsey, who just went to Philadelphia, could be coming back. Or Mike McCarthy with a combination of Elliott Wolf and Andrew Berry, one or the other, both not totally sure. And also not sure that Elliott Wolf will not have a role with any of the other ones. But the McCarthy-Wolf thing could be an easy connection, right? So we're looking at it. Josh McDaniels, Kevin Stefanski, Mike McCarthy, and then kind of their paired up bunch with that. So here is what I can say with decent certainty. I believe this is Josh McDaniels' job unless one of two things happen. One, the Cleveland Browns screw it up. We know that's all possible, right? The Cleveland Browns could screw a lot of things up. Number two, another coach blows them away. I don't think Josh McDaniels can kind of screw up this interview, but another coach could blow them away. But let's just say Josh McDaniels is the clear front runner to be the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Again, unless the Browns screw it up or another coach blows them away. What we believe is he will be paired most likely with Ziegler out of New England, and unfortunately I meant to grab his first name and I just didn't, and that's just so bad of me, but I didn't do it. So Dave Ziegler out of New England, who is their pro personnel director. That is really the belief, even though people are really pushing the idea that he would bring in Cesario. That doesn't look, I don't believe that's going to be the case. So here's what would be really interesting about that for Cleveland. It is very possible that Josh McDaniels, Orville, Cleveland area guy, Barberton, I forget all the different places that they lived, with their dad, Tom, who is kind of a coaching legend in the area. So Cleveland area, Josh McDaniels comes back. Ziegler, who is from the Cleveland area, comes with him. Gannon, who is the defensive backs coach for the Colts, and again, I did not get his first name, Jonathan. Gannon is from the Cleveland area, and the Browns' current special team coach, Mike Prefer, is also from the Cleveland area and could stick around with almost any of these coaches, and possibly all of them. Right, Stefanski, McCarthy, and McDaniels. So you could see a whole lot of Cleveland coming to Cleveland. Josh McDaniels, Ziegler, Gannon, Prefer. That is a lot of Cleveland in Josh McDaniels' coaching staff and setup. So there is a lot of possibilities there. What we also are hearing is that McDaniels already pretty much has his staff set up and has a general agreement that all of those people will be coming with him wherever he goes, and primarily it looks like that is going to be to Cleveland, right? So you have all of that going on, coming to Cleveland, and then trying to figure out who his offensive coordinator is going to be could be interesting, because Kevin O'Connell could come from Washington. There could Chad O'Shea could come from Miami. Miami's quarterback coach could come. There's lots of things that could happen for his offensive coordinator, but we understand that Josh McDaniels kind of has his coaching staff already set up. And then we have Kevin Stefanski, who DePo wanted to hire last year, who would be coming over from Minnesota. The problem with him is that he could become the Minnesota Vikings head coach. So if things don't go well in the playoffs, Mike Zimmer only has 1 year left on his contract. Minnesota really likes Stefanski, so they could actually let Zimmer go and promote Stefanski, which could obviously cause problems if the Browns kind of zero in on him. And then you have Mike McCarthy, who could go a lot of different places or could sit out another year. We know the video that was put up in the middle of the season where he has this coaching staff with Jim Haslett and a couple other people and an analytics department trying to kind of figure out the new age NFL, things that he didn't do in Green Bay. So he could come. Here's the cool thing. It sounds like the Browns have 3 pretty decent options. Right, Josh McDaniels seems to be the front runner. Kevin Stefanski coming over from Minnesota, and then Mike McCarthy. We also have an idea that they have some quality people that could come in as the general manager under Paul DePodesta. And what is really interesting about all of this is there have been lots of rumors, and I'll just use it that way, throughout. Basically, since Dorsey got there, that any kind of information that Paul DePodesta provided Dorsey got pushed to the side. Let's say it that way. Pushed to the side. It's one of the reasons Andrew Berry left the Browns, even though he was highly regarded by DePodesta and the Haslams and a few other people, is he really wasn't listened to because he was seen as one of Sashi Brown's guys, one of Paul DePodesta's guys, whatever. And now DePodesta seems like he's in charge, at least of the coaching search, and of kind of aligning the team. Again, this isn't about deciding where the team will be or exactly how things will go, but aligning the team from top to bottom, lined up. Something the Browns haven't had in a long, long time. Something that has worked in San Francisco, something that's worked in Buffalo. We will see if it's something that works with the Jets. All over the place, we've seen that alignment can be vital to success. DePodesta is now in charge, so he will go from being ignored by John Dorsey, pushed to the side by John Dorsey, to actually being the chief strategy officer for the Cleveland Browns, giving direction to the team, then allowing the general manager to acquire talent that fits what the head coach wants, while the head coach tries to make the talent that the general manager brought in work, because they're all on the same side and they're all pushing in the right direction, the same direction. It's crazy, right? We go from Kitchens, who was hired to be John Dorsey's puppet, with players who could know that really quickly, and Dorsey not really caring what Paul DePodesta had to say, or even Andrew Berry, and really focused on his guys, and really kind of de-emphasized anybody brought in by the previous regime. And then obviously he got rid of some of his guys too, like with Jannard Avery and Austin Corbett, having to cut Antonio Callaway. But we go from all of that to the possibility of Paul DePodesta paired with Josh McDaniels, or paired with Kevin Stefanski, or paired with Mike McCarthy, along with a front office that also is paired with Paul DePodesta and that head coach, right? So if we can have Paul DePodesta lined up with Elliott Wolf, lined up with Mike McCarthy, or lined up with Andrew Berry and McCarthy, or lined up with Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, or lined up with Ziegler and McDaniels, lined up. Everybody pushing in the right direction. No differences of opinions, generally speaking, about how things, the direction that we're going. Tons of differences of opinion about how we do things, and a lot of good conversation. But in the end, all aligned going forward. That is the transition the Cleveland Browns are making going into 2020. If it's not one of those three head coaches, they will either have blown the Browns away, or the Browns would have screwed it up with three different, possibly high-quality head coaches. And then we wonder, is there alignment? Is everything working out? Is this going to go any difference? And to be honest, we followed the Browns, we've loved the Browns, and we've covered the Browns for so long that we're going to ask that question no matter what. If the Browns were to hire Bill Belichick tomorrow, we would ask that question. It just is. We'd ask that question if they hired Bill Belichick as the head coach and Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator and whoever as the defense coordinator, blah, blah, blah. We would ask that question. Because life has shown us things don't work out in Cleveland. But there is a vision. The past was not going well. Freddie Kitchens was in over his head. John Dorsey brought in 8 players with the greatest accumulation of draft and cap assets possible, and have left up to, or maybe even more than 9 starting positions open going into the 2020 season. I've taught you a little bit about queso and how to make some of the best queso you'll ever eat in your entire life. And when we look to the future, Paul DePodesta will be leading a coaching search that will most likely lead to Josh McDaniels, could lead to Kevin Stefanski, could lead to Mike McCarthy, and could lead to an alignment with a general manager or general managers or a front office, however you want to look at it, that is lined up all together. It's interesting that John Dorsey is gone, and the guy that he ignored, or generally ignored for 2 years, is now running the coaching search. There you have it, folks. That is one of the longest. You probably will not get full hours very often, but we had a lot to cover here on the first of the rebranded podcast, the Mueller Sports Report, coming to you from me, Jared Mueller, on Twitter at Jared K. Mueller. That's JaredKMueller. I think I'm supposed to tell you to subscribe, like, give feedback, whatever. So please do that. Love to hear it. Hope you have a great new year. Hope your day off, if you are off, goes well and you get caught up and get your Christmas tree and Christmas lights put away and presents put away, returned, all that kind of stuff, because those are some of the things that we will be doing here in the Mueller household. Thank you for stopping by the Mueller Sports Report, and go Browns, Cavs, Indians, Buckeyes, and all the other things we're passionate about. Eat well, be well.